Glad to see everyone here this morning. I hope you guys are doing all right. I hope you guys are prepared for the heat. I was in Texas last week, and I was thinking to myself, raise your hand if you have any change for the kids, just so you know. I was thinking to myself, while I was in Texas, it was, 95 degrees, and it was humid, and I was thinking to myself, I don't think I can call myself a Texan anymore, because I don't like this. Being in the Midwest has really changed a guy. Like, I've gotten used to the winters, I've gotten used to it, but now it's Texas here again. And I guess I'm just going to have to put up with it, aren't I? Something funny this morning. My dad has gotten into this habit of calling me with the same reason. So last night he called me, and I was in bed, and I thought, I'm not going to answer right now, I'll call him back in the morning. By the time I wake up, he's already tried to call me twice. And I'm thinking to myself, oh no. I'm thinking to myself, did my mom have a stroke? Is she in the hospital? Her health isn't that great. I call him back, get him on the phone, and he has a joke he wanted to share with me. Always. This is like the 5th time in a row where he hears a joke and he wants me to tell the church. He's like, I want you can put this in your sermon, you can introduce, and he wanted me to do it this morning. And the joke he gave me was not, how do I say this? It was at the expense of women. So I decided not to tell it this morning, but I'll give you another one that he told me that's actually really funny. Okay, so you have a preacher, a doctor, and a lawyer, and they all went hunting together. And they're in their position, and they're just kind of waiting for a buck to come around, and then suddenly this beautiful, perfect buck comes by. And in an instant, they all grab their gun, and they all shoot simultaneously. And they're arguing who shot it first. Well, they decide, maybe we can go look at the body and figure out who killed it. They get to the body, and they took one look at it, and they realized they knew who shot it. They knew the lawyer and the doctor look at the preacher and say, that was definitely your shot. He says, why? He says, because look at it. The bullet went in one ear and out the other. I hope you guys are doing well this morning. I want to emphasize our VBS coming up. So we have some incredible plans for VBS. And our VBS will be amazing only if we have 2 things, workers and kids. And so I'm asking everyone to help out with our VBS. Today, they're going to set things up in the gym at 3:30. So we're asking everyone, if you're able to come, please come at 3:30. And I'm also asking everyone to invite some families, right? You may not have any kids, but find someone who does and invite them. We have flyers. Find someone to give one of these to. Hang it up in your workplace if you can. Hang it up wherever. But just find someone to ask, whether it's your neighbor, your friend, your aunt, your uncle, your son, your daughter, grandson, granddaughter. And if one of the things that might help is if you offer to bring the kids. And just tell the parents, because most parents, they love the chance to get away from their kids for a little bit, right? They love the chance. I'm not saying they don't love their children. You guys know what I'm saying. They love the chance to have a quiet house for a couple of hours, right? So please don't think that you don't need to contribute. Don't think that this is just going to go swimmingly and you don't have to do anything. This is part of serving God. This is how we spread the gospel. So please help us. This morning we are continuing our study in the book of Philippians. We're in chapter 2, verses 12 to 16 this morning. And as I've been studying the book of Philippians, I'm kind of convinced, the purpose of Paul writing this letter is what he wrote in chapter 1, verse 27. How he said, live in a manner worthy of the gospel. And I think that's really the heart of what he's saying. And then he goes on to explain what that means, right? How do you live in a manner worthy of the gospel? Well, then he gets into the heart of it in chapter 2, verses 1 to 11, which we've been talking about, to have the mindset of Christ, to think and live like Christ. And he went through, he's like, okay, to live in a manner worthy of the gospel is to live like Jesus. Well, how did Jesus live? Well, he was in heaven. He was God. He is God, but he left heaven to become human, to be a humble servant, to die on the cross. Right? That's what it means to live in a manner worthy of the gospel, if you imitate that. Because that is Jesus living out the gospel. That is Him creating the gospel in His life, right? And so our text today, stemming out of that, to live in a manner worthy of the gospel, to live like Christ, who left heaven to be incarnated, to be crucified, and to be resurrected. Our text today has a very interesting phrase. It says, "Work out your salvation with fear and trembling." Now, I remember growing up in Texas, watching my mom and my sister's farm. I remember watching my grandfather work his farm. And, as a kid, I had zero interest in farming, even though I was around farms a lot, because they didn't grow candy. They grew things that I did not like: carrots, lettuce, a lot of cucumbers, because my sister loved cucumbers and I hate cucumbers. But as I watched them, I saw all the effort that they would put into it. When you work a field, when you work a farm, they didn't have a big farm, but they had a big, enough to put in a lot of work. They had to be diligent. You have to prepare the land, right? You got to clear the field of weeds, rock, debris. You got to plow or till the soil to loosen it up to plant. You got to level the land if you need it to control the water flow and prevent erosion. You need to add fertilizer, compost to enrich the soil with nutrients. And then you got to plant. You got to sow the seed, and depending on what seed it is, you might have to plant it deeper or farther apart. You got to know the depth and the spacing. You got to water it. You got to irrigate it. You got to be very consistent. You can't give it too much. You can't give it too little. And sometimes it needs different amounts for the stage of growth it's in. You got to maintain the farm. You got to pick up the weeds. You got to get rid of the pests, which was always a big challenge out there. Then you harvest. Then you gather the crop when mature. Working a farm is a lot of work. You're putting your blood, sweat, and tears into it. But one thing I've noticed about farming is that for all the work you're doing, you're only creating a circumstance, right? You are creating a scenario where the seed can grow, but you're not making the seed grow. Only God makes the seed grow. And it's fascinating to me how a seed so small can grow into a plant. God tells us very clearly, and He may have been speaking in spiritual terms, but I think it's also very literal, that we plant and we water, but it's God who gives the growth. I think that applies to real plants too. But just because something's a gift from God doesn't mean you don't have a responsibility, doesn't mean you don't have to put effort into it. God makes the seed grow, yeah, but we're the one who tries to create the circumstance where the seed will grow. All of our work is to bring to completion God's gift. That God provides the gift, and here we are kind of working around it, working with it, working in tandem with God, but that doesn't change the fact that it's still a gift. See, in our text this morning, we're going to see how we work to bring about the completion of God's gift. That God offers us a gift, but that doesn't mean that we don't have to put effort in. We put effort in to allow that gift to flourish. In the passage of Philippians chapter 2, verse 12 to 18, God's going to talk to us about living out our salvation. The passage says, "Therefore, my beloved, as you have always obeyed, so now, not also in my present, but much more in my absent, work out your own salvation with fear and trembling. For it is God who works in you both to will and to work for His good pleasure. Do all things without grumbling or disputing, that you may be blameless and innocent, children of God, without blemish, in the midst of a crooked and twisted generation, among whom you shine as lights in the world, holding fast to the word of life, so that in the day of Christ I may be proud that I did not run in vain or labor in vain. Even if I am poured out as a drink offering upon the sacrificial offering of your faith, I am glad and rejoice with you all. Likewise, you also should be glad and rejoice with me. So he starts off with this really unique phrase, right? Work out your own salvation. Now, all those words, there's nothing unique about the words themselves. It's unique that Paul would put them all in that order. Work out your own salvation with fear and trembling. It's very strange to see these words put together, especially if you're familiar with other parts of the New Testament. Books like Romans and Galatians that spend a lot of time trying to explain to us, you're not saved by works. And yet that's kind of what it sounds like. It's not what he's saying, but it sounds like it, right? Paul spends a huge chunk of his time in Romans and, basically half of the book of Galatians explaining, hey, you're not saved by your work. You're not saved by what you do. You do things, but that's not why God saves you. You're not saved based upon how well you do, right? And he's trying to get back into their mind. You're saved by your faith. You're saved by you trusting in God. And a text like this, whenever he says, work out your own salvation, it's also really important to remember that this is written to Christians. He's writing to people who have already been saved, right? So he's not telling them this is how you get saved. These are already people who know that Jesus is Lord, that he died for our sins, and in faith they have connected with his death. He's not saying work for your own salvation. And also notice he says, for it is God who works in you. Paul is also not trying to say, work yourself, right? He's not trying to say that this is all up to you, that don't worry about everyone else, that it's just you. Paul here, he's writing to a group. He's writing to a church. So he's not trying to give this impression that all Christians are just islands, that we work ourselves and it's irrelevant what other people do. That's not the idea. He has been saying several times, he's like, be of one mind, have unity, have the same mind, right? The same goal, the same spirit, right? He's been trying to emphasize that we're all together here. He's trying to emphasize this, I think, the importance of obedience, just like Jesus was obedient to the point of the cross. Interestingly, this word, work out, in the Greek, was a popular word for working a field. It meant that you put in this diligence. It was also a word for working a mine, right? So you'd put in all this work and you would get all the valuable minerals. You would work out a farm, and the field would yield the crops. Paul isn't saying this is how you get saved. He's saying this is how you bring it to completion. This is how you make your salvation flourish. This is carrying it out. When you work a field, you have to be diligent. You have to prepare the land. You got to clear the field of weeds, plow the soil. You got to level the land if needed to control the water. You got to add fertilizer. You got to plant the seeds. You got to water consistently. You got to remove the weeds, keep away the pests, and then you get a harvest. Working a farm is a lot of work. And you're going to put your blood, sweat, and tears into it. But for all the work, all you're doing is creating a circumstance. You're creating a scenario where the seed is going to grow, but you're not making the seed grow. Only God makes the seed grow. Like God said, we plant and we water, but God gives the growth. And just because something is a gift from God doesn't mean we don't have the responsibility or the effort to put into it. God makes the seed grow, and we try to provide a scenario where that's going to happen. All of our work is just bringing to completion God's gift. And I think that is the idea here when he says, work out your salvation. Right? He's not saying work hard so you can be saved. That's not what he's saying. He's saying you've been given this gift of salvation. Now live it out. Live in a way that brings about the results of your salvation. Live in such a way that your salvation shows its results. Act according to your salvation. Whatever your salvation leads to, do that. Let your life produce the fruit of your salvation. Bring your salvation to its intended outcome by your conduct. Your salvation wants to go in a certain direction. Go with it. Put your salvation into practice. Live out your salvation. You know, this is just the same thing that he said in chapter 1, verse 27, to live in a manner worthy of the gospel. I think he's saying the exact same thing here. The gospel is our salvation. To work out our salvation is to live according to our salvation, to put our salvation into practice. And Paul is trying to make very clear, he's saying, it's God who works in you. Notice that he says that immediately after. He says, you work it out, but it's God working in you. That means that there's this cooperation here. That God is working in us, but we are also working. That we're working together with God. Just like on a farm. You're doing everything you can for the plants to grow. But you can only really do so much, right? You know, there are times when you do everything right, but that seed just doesn't want to grow. That plant just dies. You can do everything wrong, and somehow the plant makes it through anyway. I mean, because with plants, it's almost like you're working with them in a way. You're a team together. You're just doing your part. You're getting rid of the obstacles, creating a good scenario for it to grow, and God's going to do the rest. And that's how God works through us. I think we need to remember this. You know, we could use a little bit of fear and trembling in our life sometimes. We need a little bit of humility, a little bit of reverence. We need to remember that's not just about us. We need to remember that God doesn't like some things. It's not about how hard we work, but that doesn't mean we don't have to work. Your goal is to work alongside with God. Your goal is for God to work through you. But God is not going to work through you if you only act like it's you and that you're the one working. God's not going to work through you if you don't work at all. And so as he says this unique phrase of work out your salvation, Paul then proceeds to get extremely practical. He throws out this one thing that kind of sticks out a little bit, and it hits hard. He's talking about, living out our salvation, living according to this gift, but then he shifts to living as a child of God, right? To conduct ourselves in this way, and then he gives a couple of practical applications. And this first one, it sticks out. He says, do all things without grumbling or disputing. That's big. That you may be blameless and innocent, children of God without blemish in the midst of a crooked and twisted generation, among whom you shine as lights in the world, holding fast to the word of life, so that in the day of Christ I may be proud that I did not run in vain or labor in vain. I think the big point of these verses is trying to say you need to behave as who you are before God. If you're a child of God, you need to act like it, right? God made us children so we could live like it. Even if we're in the midst of a twisted and crooked generation, God made us lights of the world, so you should shine. God gave you the word of life, so you should hold to it. It's very important that we maintain our purity from the world as Christians. Christians should be different. There should be a noticeable difference between us and the people who don't believe in Jesus. If you look and act like everyone else, you are failing. You are not working out your salvation. To work out our salvation means to be different. We are in a twisted and crooked generation. That's the norm of society, is sin. To be good, to live righteously, to obey God, is to be different from the people around us. And notice the practical thing, right? I don't know if you guys get this feeling, but I feel like when I read that, I feel like I'm slapped in the face a little bit, and how it's sobering. It catches my attention, and it challenges me. You know, Paul could have brought up any number of sins, right? He could have said, avoid sexual immorality, do not get drunk, do not steal, keep your life free from the love of money. But that's not what he said. He said, do all things without grumbling or disputing. Other translations may say, do all things without complaining and arguing. I don't know. Maybe he picked something small for a reason. And when I say small, I mean something that we consider small. God doesn't consider it small, but we tend to think, well, I'm not having sex outside of marriage, I'm not getting drunk, I'm not stealing, I'm not murdering. Complaining isn't that bad. Well, he says, do all things without grumbling or disputing. You know, that word grumbling is an interesting word. It's this quiet complaining. It's this expression of dissatisfaction. Maybe you guys probably know what I'm talking about. It's being frustrated and muttering something under your breath. It's that attitude of always being frustrated, that attitude of dissatisfaction. It's that attitude that leads to you constantly arguing. Christians should not have this attitude. We shouldn't be constantly dissatisfied. You should not be the complainer. I don't know, I mean, you might know someone. If you don't, it's probably you, and I say that kind of tongue-in-cheek, but you probably know someone who cannot help but complain. They complain all the time. And I don't know if you noticed this, but I've noticed I don't like being around those people. They ooze out this negativity, this pessimism. You know, there's always something wrong. That there's always frustrated with something. They're never happy. They're never content. They always have something to argue about and to complain about. You should not be that person. And it's really interesting here because Paul is really borrowing a whole lot from the Old Testament here, and you see it in the language that he uses, right? So a little bit of the history in the Old Testament. You have the nation of Israel. You know, you had all the 10 plagues whenever the Jews were in slavery under Egypt, and then Moses comes along, he does the 10 plagues, they get freed, and then he splits the water, and then they get into the wilderness, they get to Mount Sinai, and you see in the story, Israel is constantly complaining. That at one point, I mean, they get hungry. Instead of just asking for food, they start complaining. They're like, I wish we were never saved. They get thirsty. And instead of just asking for water and trusting God, they start complaining. I wish we were never saved. Right? At one point, you know, before they split the flood, they split the waters, Moses split the Red Sea, Pharaoh was chasing after them, and what did they say? I wish we were never saved. This constant dissatisfaction. And the Bible loved to use this word to describe it. Grumbling. It's the same word. They constantly grumbled. They had this constant attitude of dissatisfaction, that every inconvenience was the worst thing ever. That they couldn't put up with a mild inconvenience. That they couldn't just come to God and say, God, could you help us out here? They didn't have a little bit of humility and trust and faith in God, that God would take care of them. If God rescued them from Egypt with all the 10 plagues, then obviously He's going to give you some food, give you some water. But the second they go hungry and thirsty, they just start complaining, and they're irritated, and they're frustrated, and they say, oh, I wish I was never saved to begin with. That discontentment, that attitude of entitlement, that I shouldn't have to go through inconveniences. Who are you? Do you know what kind of world we live in? There's inconveniences 5 times before you walk outside the house. What makes you think that you shouldn't have some sort of inconvenience, but instead you find one inconvenience, and it ruins your day? Why does that ruin your day? If that's what's going to happen, if that's what it takes to ruin your day, you're never going to have a good day. You just aren't. And what did God do? Because if you remember the story, they were constantly grumbling, they were constantly complaining. And God said, here's this promised land. I'm going to give it to you. But they kept complaining and complaining and complaining. And God had enough. And He said, you know what? I had this promised land set for you. You're not going to get it. Nope. Instead, what's going to happen is you're going to wander around the desert for 40 years. I'm going to wait for every single person in that generation, with the exception of 2. Every single person in that generation is going to pass away. Your kids are going to get that land. You don't get to see it. God had enough. God does not like complaining. God does not like this constant attitude of dissatisfaction, this grumbling. He doesn't like that attitude of entitlement. And Paul here is bringing that over. And he's saying, do all things without grumbling or disputing. And when he says that, he wants you to think about that story. And you know that because he says, we're in the midst of a crooked and twisted generation. Actually, Moses used those exact words to describe those people. Crooked and twisted generation. He said those words in Deuteronomy. Paul is saying, you know those? You know that example? How it's very clear that God hates complaining? Yeah, guess what? God still hates complaining. Even if you find yourself in a group, a community, a society where there's this attitude, you don't go along with it. Don't be the person who refuses to be satisfied. Don't be the person who refuses to never air their grievances. Don't be the person who refuses to have something good to say. See, when you're talking to someone, when you're texting someone, when you're emailing someone, when you're posting on Facebook, whatever you do, don't let your life be filled with frustration. That negativity is infectious. That pessimism is poisonous. That it's verbal pollution, and it takes a toll on everyone. You don't have a right to steal someone else's joy. And I'm not saying that you can't have a bad day and be frustrated. That's not what I'm saying. I'm not saying that, hey, there's something wrong and you feel like people should know about it so that we can fix it. I'm talking about complaining for complaining's sake. And a lot of times people who complain for complaining's sake act like they're not doing it. See, the pessimists always think they're realists when they're not. I'm talking about an attitude that is the opposite of joy. And that's what this book is about. Philippians is about joy. That if you focus on nothing but your frustrations and let even the smallest inconveniences be these big problems, you're never going to have joy. You want joy? Start by not complaining. Simple. Just when an inconvenience occurs, be frustrated for a second and then let it roll off your shoulders. Right? When you're in a situation that is frustrating and unfortunate, everyone's frustrated except for you. When everyone's complaining, you be the one person not complaining. I remember one time I was in Denver, Colorado in a layover because a storm had hit Denver. Everyone missed their flights. All planes were grounded. And that's a frustrating situation. And I was waiting in line, and they got me a new flight, but they ran out of hotel vouchers for that day. And I'm thinking to myself, you ran out of hotel vouchers, there's 100 people in line behind me. And I was frustrated. But the person in front of me was not the problem. The person in front of me, that was not their fault. And so I decided, I'm not going to be frustrated. I'm not going to show them my frustration. I'm not going to take it out on them. And I told them very, very loudly, you guys are all doing wonderful. And I look back and it's really funny. Because I said it really, really loudly, because I wanted all the people, because I just had one and there were like 5 in front of me that were trying to help people get new flights and everything. And I said really loudly, you all are doing wonderful and this is not your fault. The chorus of complaints I heard behind me. I look back and it's really funny. In situations that are frustrating, you find the reason to be the sunshine. You find the reason to have joy. I was frustrated, yeah, but I'm not going to have that attitude. I kept telling myself, yeah, God's putting me through the ringer. Oh, this is a trial I'm going to have to figure out. You know, I got to figure out how to handle this. And I was early on in traveling, and honestly, I learned what to do when you have a really long layover. That hey, you can just go on your phone and find a motel, get an Uber out there, and you're perfectly fine. And I got home a day later than I would have liked. But I didn't take my frustration out on anyone. And I was proud of that. Because I think that's what God wants us to do. To be a light in the world. And just these last couple of verses. He says, even if I am poured out as a drink offering upon the sacrificial offering of your faith, I am glad and rejoice with you all. Likewise, you also should be glad and rejoice with me. And again, Paul's kind of connecting back to the Old Testament. I think this is a really good thing to end on here. In the Old Testament, the Jews would sacrifice animals to worship God, right? So, they would get the animal for the appropriate sacrifice. They would bring the animal to the priest. The priest would offer the animal, and that's how you worship God, right? You were giving that animal to God, in a way. And there was a financial cost associated with an animal, because those are expensive. And they would burn it, and it would go up to God in a pillar of smoke, visually speaking. The idea is you're giving it to God. And there was this one sacrifice called the burnt offering. It is one of the most important sacrifices in the Old Testament. And the idea, the sacrifices are all symbolic. It symbolized your complete devotion to God. Because whenever you offered an animal to God, sometimes part of the animal gets back to you for food. Sometimes part of the animal goes back to the priest for food, right? In the burnt offering, you gave the animal, and the entire thing was burnt and given to God. The entire thing. Not a single piece went to anywhere else but to God. And that gave you this idea, that the symbolism behind that is that sacrifice. That animal is supposed to be me. It's supposed to be Jesus, and Jesus devoted his entire life to God, but now it's me. Now I'm the sacrifice. I am giving every piece of me to God. That includes my attitude. That includes the words that I say. The entire animal burned on the altar, consumed by fire. We step on that altar as living sacrifices, and our entire life is offered to God. Everything I am belongs to God. That's what you're saying. I belong to God. And that's the heart of what we're trying to communicate here. That's the heart of what Paul's talking about when he says, work out your salvation. All the practical areas of your life, let your salvation decide how you behave, right? Whatever part of your life it is, and that includes what you say, the attitude, the mindset, the grumbling and complaining, all of it. You should be completely and fully surrendered to God. And Paul's over here saying the sacrificial offering of your faith, that when you are dedicating your entire life to God, you are worshiping God. And Paul's saying, in some of the sacrifices, you add a drink on top of it, right? You would pour, usually it's wine or oil on top of the sacrifice. And that's what Paul's saying. Paul's saying, I'm helping you devote your entire life to God. I do a drink offering, but you're the main offering, that we're offering ourselves to God. And Paul's just like, I'm just happy to help. That we can fully devote ourselves to God. But in order to do that, you got to work with Him. You're going to let God work through you, like working a field. Yeah, you're going to try and create the circumstance. Yeah, you're going to get rid of that mindset. You're going to remove the complaining. You're going to remove the grumbling, remove the argument, remove that dissatisfaction, and watch God grow. In the same way that you would have a plant, and you got to pluck all those weeds, and you got to keep away the pests, and watch God make it grow. It's the same way. Live out this gift that God has given you. Why should you avoid complaining? Why should you avoid this attitude of discontentment? Why should you shine as a light in a world, in a twisted and crooked generation? Because we're completely devoted to God. We are completely surrendered to God. God doesn't want you spreading that poison of negativity. He doesn't want you bitter. He doesn't want you frustrated. He wants you to see the blessings He's giving you. He wants you to be different from others, to see the world through the gift of Jesus, to have the mind of Christ. And Christ had more reason to complain than any of us. But He didn't. And so the questions we're left with: are you living out your salvation? Are you content? Are you avoiding the attitude of grumbling and dissatisfaction? The invitation today is going to be for those who find themselves not completely devoted to God, those who have been caught up in grumbling, those who have not been living out their salvation. We as a church are here for you to pray with you and encourage you. The elders are in the back. Come forward as we stand and sing.